Good morning, everyone. Welcome to meeting 12 of the Planning and Housing Committee. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are on Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence sont enrichies et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. I know we have regrets this morning from Councillors Brockington, Kelly, Vice Chair Gower, and Truster, but I'll ask for a roll call for those of us who are left.
Okay. Councillor Curry. Here. Councillor Dudas.
Easy.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Kelly. Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
And Chair Leeper, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. And a quick note that I've asked Councillor Curry to be our Vice Chair today in Councillor Gower's absence. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as 4.9, 4 to 4.5 in the other order, of course, on today's agenda. It's going to be another one of those meetings. For the item just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on July 12th, 2023, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. The chair read the following statement at the outset of the meeting pursuant to the Planning Act. Did I? Amazing. Any declarations of interest? I don't see any. Confirmation of the minutes. Are the minutes of meeting 11 confirmed? Thank you. Taking a look then at the agenda, see what we can carry now. The first item, 4.1, City of Ottawa's Housing Accelerator Fund application. I think many of us were at the table yesterday when that was brought to the Finance and Corporate Services Committee. Are members interested in receiving a presentation on that again? No, I think everyone here was pretty much available for that. So is that item carried? Lauren and Paul, thank you very much. Great work on that application. The 4.2 front ending report, design and construction of the Longfields Drive and Kilspindie Ridge roundabout in Barrhaven West. Does anyone want that held? Is that item carried? Thank you. Another front ending report, design and construction of the Innes Road and LaMarche Avenue traffic control signals. Would anyone like that held? Is that item carried? Thank you. We have an item for which we'll be receiving a presentation as well as a delegation on the renewable energy generation facility and battery energy storage systems. So we'll hold that. The zoning bylaw amendment for 1209 Saint Laurent Boulevard in Beacon Hills, Searville. We do have a presentation if anyone wants to receive that, and we do have the applicants. Did anyone want to hold that for the presentation? I don't see that. The applicants led by Paul Black at FOTEN are available to the applicants. If the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak?
No, we don't need to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is that item carried then? Thank you. Zoning bylaw amendment 1400 and 1410 Uville Drive. Staff are prepared to make a presentation if anyone would like that. Does anyone want the presentation? I don't see anyone clamoring for that. The applicants are here led by Brigitte Alchawa, as well as colleagues. Brigitte or colleagues, if the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still want to speak?
Hi,
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Hi, Barrett.
Perfect. No, if you're prepared to move forward, then no, we don't need to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this item carried? Thank you. The zoning bylaw amendment for 2616 and 2628 Edinburgh Place. We have again Brigitte Alchawa with Macintosh Perry, Michelle Julio available to speak to the item. I wasn't anticipating a presentation to the applicants. If the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak?
Nope, we are happy to just proceed.
Thank you very much. Is that item carried? Thank you, colleagues. We have an item at 200 and 201 Friel Street. I know we have delegations to this one and I'm anticipating a presentation, so we'll hold that item. The zoning bylaw amendment at 1184, 1188, and 1196 Cummings Avenue. We have a delegation for that one, so we will hold it. Is the status update for Planning and Housing Committee increase in motions for the period ending June 23rd, 23 received? Thank you. And then I'm going to now, before we get to it, just ask for your permission to lift the information previously distributed and add it to the agenda. Councillor Curry has that motion. Yeah, for lifting.
Okay.
That pursuant to subsection 89(4) of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2022-410, the Planning and Housing Committee approved that the rules of procedure be suspended to allow for the consideration of the item listed as 8.1 status update on the new zoning bylaw.
May we lift that and add it to the agenda? Carried. Amazing. So we'll hold that. And actually, I think we can probably deal as well now with the Miracle League and Jay's Carefield ground sign. Councillor Kitts, you brought notice of a motion. Do you want to introduce that?
Sure. I read it out at the last meeting, so I don't feel like I need to read the whole thing, but essentially the Miracle League, which is a beloved park that provides an accessible space for children to play, has received a donation for a new sign, and it's been a bit of a challenge to locate it just because of right of way and et cetera, but staff have worked with me on this to find a solution. So therefore, be it resolved that committee recommends that council approve an exemption to sections 114 and 121, table 1A of the permanent signs on private property bylaw 2016-326 as amended to allow: 1, the installation of an additional identification ground sign within 30 meters of an existing ground sign on the same premises. The sign base area of the 2 ground signs beyond the maximum allowable 5 meters squared, but not exceeding 7.3 meters squared.
Any questions? Seeing none, is that item carried? Thank you. We'll have the big debate on that one at council. Yes. All right, back to the start of our agenda. So the first item which we'll consider is the renewable energy generation facility and battery energy storage systems interim regulations and increasing opportunity for access to retail food stores. Okay. Mitchell, do you have a presentation for us? Amazing. Thanks. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I'm here to give a quick presentation on renewable energy generation facilities, REGFs, and battery energy storage systems, BESS. We're going to be introducing some interim regulations and increasing the opportunity for access to retail food stores. Next slide. So the recommendations are to permit retail food stores in additional zones. And we're going to be adding a definition for renewable energy generation facilities and modifying the current definition of utility installation to exclude renewable energy generation facilities from that definition. We also are looking to limit the size of battery energy storage systems in agricultural zones. The first recommendation here is a housekeeping amendment, and the second two are interim measures until we have a report in Q4 of 2023 to introduce regulations regarding renewable energy generation facilities. Next slide. So providing retail food stores in more locations. So these amendments are proposed to permit retail food stores in the last remaining zones where retail store is permitted and retail food store is not permitted. This is a general housekeeping amendment. A retail food store will be added as a permitted use to the following zones. So certain R5 zones, so residential fifth density zones, where limited non-residential uses are already permitted on the ground floor. And then in the I2 zone, so a major institutional zone, an L2B or major leisure facility zone, and an MC7, a mixed use commercial zone, and T2, so a ground transportation zone. Next slide. This amendment implements the policies throughout the official plan relating to healthy communities and 15-minute neighborhoods, and in particular, section 4.11, item 1, which directs that retail food stores should be generally permitted use. So that's pretty much it about retail food stores. And then the next slide we have is about interim renewable energy generation facility provisions. This report will also be going to ARAC tomorrow, as these facilities are principally proposed in the rural areas. These are interim measures until the full set of provisions are brought in the fall of 2023 as directed by council. Renewable energy generation facilities will not be permitted in any zone as of right in the city until the full set of provisions is in place and approved by council before the end of the year. For example, some of these REGFs are wind turbines, solar farms, bioenergy production. Obviously, we want to make sure that we put them in the right place and have regulations to do so. Battery energy systems will continue to be widely permitted, except in AG zones, where we want to limit them to a maximum of 1 hectare. Battery energy systems are considered to be utility installations, so they continue to be permitted in almost all zones. Anyways, so the next slide. Questions?
Thank you very much. We do have one delegation before we turn to questions of staff. Angela Keller-Herzog, good morning. There she is. Good morning, Angela. I think you may have a presentation.
Good morning. Yes, I did put together a quick visual presentation, which will come up in short order, I'm sure. So I'm Angela Keller-Herzog, the Executive Director of Cafes.
Angela, we're just having a bit of difficulty getting the presentation to show on screen. Can you bear with us just a moment or two?
Sure.
Thanks.
You've done a remarkable job of clearing the agenda, so I guess we're not feeling super pressed for time. I wasn't expecting to be first up, that's for sure.
I may not stick to a strict 5-minute rule for you this morning, Angela.
Whoa. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Boing. Okay, so it's kind of coming up weird on my screen, but I can see it. exit full screen. That's better. All right. Yeah, so I'm not here to talk about the grocery stores, but I'm here to talk about the renewable energy generation and batteries. Next slide, please. I think most of you know cafes. We've been around for over 10 years. We're a network of local environmental leaders. Next slide, please. So overview of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context, a little bit about the energy transition, energy resiliency, which I've been learning more about, and then also local benefits and local choices. Next slide, please. So this thing came as a huge surprise for us. We were well aware of the official plan having provisions to permit renewable energy. And we were well aware of Councillor Brown's motion that was passed in February, asking for the zoning regulations on this to be spelled out by Q4. So the fact that suddenly in the summer, bang, this comes with no consultation was kind of like a surprise. So I got this email saying like, Angela, have you seen this? So we hadn't seen it. And at first, like this, like basically is like a ban, right? It basically says like you can't do renewable energy generation in any zone, like not in Ottawa, doors closed. And there's further detailed regulations on size limitations on the battery. So after I peeled myself off the ceiling, I was then told I should speak with Carol Ruddy, who has excellent communication skills and was able to very effectively lower my blood pressure. And we had a good chat, and she assured me that there was no there was no project that's being held up by this. This is just purely an interim measure. It's not going to have any measurable impact on anything, no project affected, so I should just calm down. So I did calm down, and I learned that there is a consultant who is doing detailed work that will help to inform staff on all the different dimensions. So that's great too. So there is still a residual question though, like why? Like, why does the city of Ottawa suddenly in the middle of the summer say, well, bam, we're going to put a ban on this, even though there's no project coming, nothing. It's like a little bit bizarre. And Carol told me that this was coming from staff. So we're usually told about how staff are very busy and tied up. And I think there's many things that the new OP has introduced uncertainty, hence we're working on the new zoning bylaw. So it seems very mysterious that we're suddenly using city administrative resources to put these interim measures for no apparent reason. So next slide, please. However, we're not excited because we are not seeing any project held up. So I thought that I would give you a little bit, though, of how we're seeing this. We know that there's a very high percentage of people in Ottawa that are concerned about the climate emergency. And this is I would say 75, 85% of people. And this is not just inner urban, this is everywhere. The problem is the question comes well, what can we do about this climate emergency? And it's an uncomfortable topic. So most people then go live their normal lives. But in terms of the solutions that are there, in terms of individual solution, government solution, regulation, banning renewable energy is never on the menu. It just isn't. So all energy solutions come with risks, and we need to manage risks with a responsible and balanced way. So, I mean, one of the questions that I've been asked as well is Ottawa going to regulate new gas plants, as the Ford government has proposed? Is there going to be zoning that permits setting up new fossil fuel infrastructure? So these questions are being raised because of this sudden ban, which I'm told is just for 5 months and just interim. Next slide, please. So Cafes has been doing these workshops across the city on climate resiliency. And resiliency is defined as a system's ability to anticipate, prepared for, and adapt to changing conditions. And part of it is also like the ability to recover, from shocks. Next slide, please. So on the energy dimension, we have been hearing a lot from people in terms of how people want backup solutions and microgrids and all this kind of thing. But at a higher level, when I look at the literature, like what are the dimensions of like utility or like municipal or provincial level energy resiliency? These dimensions that I've taken from, okay, my slide is a little cut off. So this is like a community resiliency options report from 2023.
Angela, your 5 minutes elapsed a bit ago. Is there a wrap up you want to provide?
Sure. Can we just go to my last slide? Sorry, I have to admit I haven't timed this. So people are concerned about energy resiliency, but we're also aware that in the rural area, there is a great deal of concern about solutions being imposed on them from like the urban area. So it's like, okay, Inner Ottawa is making decisions that will then force industrial wind turbines and all kinds of things on the rural area. So I think that there's a great need to actually do fulsome consultation so that we do get the rural voices and not just two of them that are like writing all the time. And that we also need to talk about how we realize some economic benefits from local energy generation and all these backup options. So what I've been hearing is that there can be benefits of $15,000 per year per turbine for the landowner, that there are cogeneration possibilities, and that we can actually benefit agricultural use by locking in like 20-year leases saying this land has to be used for this energy generation in combination with agriculture, which would then prevent like urban sprawl on prime agricultural land.
I'll cut you out on that note, Angela. Thank you very much. But I'll open it up to councillors who may have questions for you. And I see Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Angela. I take it that the primary concern you have is in regards to that there might be concern at the agricultural end. So I take it you're probably going to go to committee for the agriculture committee. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm planning to. And again, like the main concern is that we figure out ways that I think the public consultation, like certainly there's been like zero public consultation on this interim measure, right? It just like showed up. But for the new zoning regulations that we're expecting in Q4, I think that the pitch I'm trying to make is that we really need to make sure that the different rural voices are heard, and there's like a more in-depth consultation than just saying 7 days before you'll get some documents. Because there are certain organizations like cafes, right, that keep an eye on the legislative agenda, and there is like a very active anti-wind set of people that are just a small group of people, but they're very active. But I think to be fair to the rural residents, I think that there should be a more fulsome consultation process, especially if the city has engaged a consultant, and that there'll be like more elaborate knowledge being generated in terms of the dimensions that need to be considered before deciding on setbacks and sizes and definitions, and figuring out what is the best practice in other parts of Canada, if not North America.
Okay, thank you. So but In terms of what is being proposed as an interim measure for retail stores, you don't have an issue with that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Angela? No? Are there questions for staff? Councillor Dudas?
I think I beat Councillor Kavanaugh by like one split second. We're just in the queue.
A second, that was it.
My questions are very simple. I just, in particular to the retail food stores. I know it's housekeeping. Why was it not already in place? It seems like it's a given, right? That we want to see more our food stores, that we want to see more accessibility to food supplies. Is this historically, was there a reason why we didn't have it on the books?
This was just, as you saw, there were only 5 zones that did not have it. I think over time, we have added retail food store to the majority of zones. This was just an exercise of going through and recognizing where we forgot or where it was missed and adding it in there.
Okay. No, I'm happy to see that part in particular because a lot of our communities are being built with no easy access to food. We have food insecurity. So I was pleased to see that. In regards to the renewable facilities, I'm pleased that we are putting a pause on it to see what the report says, because I do think that there are implications with where we position these locations and these facilities, particularly for rural communities. So just to understand a little bit more about what will be coming back. Once again, you're in the process of working on it. So I don't want you to give me the full report because otherwise we'd be debating that here. But what can we expect that we'll be looking at when you bring the report back to us at the end of this year?
Through the chair. So we've hired a consultant who has expertise in this area. We have official plan policies that direct where these facilities are to be located. And so the instructions given to the consultant is to develop zoning provisions to implement those permissions in the official plan in section 411. And the designations where renewable energy generation facilities are to be permitted in the official plan are all rural designations with some qualifications about certain designations are limited to, accessory uses for renewable energy. So small scale ones, in particular for the agricultural zone. So they'll be working on developing those provisions, and they are going to be doing a best practices review of, setbacks and so on for renewable energy generation facilities in their various forms, as well as an overview of current practices in Ontario. And they understand that they have to consult with various stakeholders. They've been given a stakeholder list, which includes Hydro Ottawa and Hydro One, and all of the, Angela and cafes to look after that oversight on our part for not having contacted Angela with this amendment.
Well, I'm happy to hear that Hydro Ottawa is also included. They're a huge partner with us. We're their largest stakeholder. I will ask though, and I'm sure that they're on the list, but rural councillors, I'm assured that their stakeholders included separately. We all are curious. We all are invested in the outcome of this, but them more so than maybe even some of us in more suburban and urban areas.
Councillor Dudas, we can arrange for briefings for you as the project progresses over the summer with the draft revisions. So you see those ahead of time.
Certainly, once again, I want to make sure that my colleagues who are in rural areas have a significant heads up as to what's coming from the report. And then, of course, if the invite is extended to the rest of us, I'm sure we'll be interested as well. But if that could be included on the stakeholder list, that would be, and the comms rollout, that'd be appreciated.
Very much. Thank you. We will do that.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that Councillor Dudas covered off most of what I was going to say, so I'm not worried about it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So glad to see the update on retail food stores. It generated a lot of interest in some of my less 15-minute neighborhood design communities that would love a grocery store or closer than an hour walk. But it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation because they don't have amenities. It's more of an R3, R4 zone in those communities. So I was just wondering why, if you could explain why the permissions don't extend past R5. I think I know what you're going to say, but.
Through the chair, we only added it to where retail store was already permitted. So if retail store was permitted, we added retail food store because they are very similar, unfortunately, and maybe in the new zoning bylaw, we may see more opportunity for such things in lower density zones. But at the moment, with the current zoning, we're limiting it to where retail store was permitted.
Okay, thank you for that. Something to keep my eye on going forward. And then in terms of the agricultural aspect, I will save those questions for tomorrow because I know this is coming to ARAC, so I think it'll be more appropriate in that forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of staff? Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, Mitchell and Carol. Moving on. I know Kelly will correct me if I'm wrong, that we are moving on to 200 and 201 Friel Street. This meeting wouldn't happen every 2 weeks without Kelly. All right, so I'm anticipating we'll receive a presentation today. Aaron, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we're talking about the application at 200-201 Friel Street. I'm Erin O'Connell. I'm the file lead on this project. And it will be, the new project will be soon to be addressed as 200 Beausoleil Drive, just to point that out. Next slide, please. So the site, it's just under a hectare right now. And it's an Ottawa community housing property. There are 2 buildings on the site existing. It's an 11 and a 13-story building on the site with a total of 155 dwelling units. So the site also has a surface and underground parking garage on it, which is seeking to be redeveloped for a new proposed development of a 20-story building with 160 units within it for Ottawa community housing. Next slide. So the current zoning on the property, it's a residential 5th density zone, and the proposed zoning will maintain that residential 5th density, but apply 2 different exceptions. One to address the existing buildings, the 2 11 and 13-story buildings in the existing situation, and the other to reflect the proposed development on the site. So I'm going to come back in a second to the proposed amendments to floor space index height and setbacks. But in terms of why we're accepting of these proposed amendments, in terms of aisle width, the applicant's still working on the configuration of the underground parking garage, and it will be bigger in places. But at their smallest point, they are proposing 4.5 meters, and that doesn't impact site maneuverability. So we're okay with that. There's a driveway width max right now in our zoning bylaw. And the intention of that is so we don't really have wide driveways that dominate the public realm. In this particular situation, the access is provided from the rear, and there's a serious turn into the garage. And so it will have little impact on the public realm, and it'll help them with their circulation on the site. So that's why we're okay with that. In terms of parking, our official plan, as you likely know, speaks to reducing or eliminating parking requirements when there's proximity to public transit. And we're looking to a transition over time to less auto-dependent developments. In this situation, there's also official plan recognition of priority for public realm for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users over motorists. In this area particularly, the site's 770 meters from the Rideau Station O-Train, or a 1 kilometer walk. And it's 80 meters from Rideau Street, which scores a 9, and that's our highest possible score in the city in our 15-minute neighborhood measurement tool for the provision of service and amenities in close proximity. There's lots of on-street parking as well in close proximity to the site, paid and unpaid. They're also incorporating the applicant through the site plan control process, a number of transportation demand management strategies to ensure the encouragement of using transit through the site. And there's a car share space proposed as part of that underground parking garage. Ottawa Community Housing has also indicated to us that their parking requirements are not, don't match those for traditional sites in the city. Next slide, please. So in terms of the height and the floor space index, we do have policy permission in this area for up to 25 stories with a floor space index maximum of 5 under certain circumstances, which are being met through this application. There's direction in our official plan and housing and homelessness plan to prioritize and provide affordable housing and to leverage existing sites in the city in order to do so. Next slide, please. In terms of the setbacks and separation distances, this just shows, you can see the parking garage on the site, the surface parking area is where the proposed building will be. The policy in general in our plan is a 23-meter setback between high-rise buildings and to accommodate 13 meters on each site. The intention of this is to ensure that there's privacy, that there's not windows facing directly into each other from high-rise developments, and that there's some light and air between the buildings. So we have 2 scenarios that we looked at when considering this request for the reduction. It's the existing scenario right now and potential future redevelopment of the sites around this particular proposed site. So the other building that's owned by Ottawa Community Housing, it's on the left of the screen, will be 21 meters away from this proposed development and has a blank facade on that side wall, which eliminates our concerns about privacy, as we mentioned. The development to the south, it's a Morguard property located to the south, 160 Chapel Street, and they have also a blank facade, which is located 27.9 meters away from this proposed high rise. Where their windows face on this development at 160 Chapel, the distance is about 60 meters. So that's the separation distance that we're contemplating between those existing high rises. This proposed development, we looked at it to the south, and it is built to approximately the maximum proposed density in the official plan. And so we looked at potential redevelopment scenarios in that area, and we think generally they would be oriented towards Rideau Street and would still be able to accommodate those reasonable separation distances from this particular proposal. It is an unusual site in terms of the configuration and the context of the site. So this is a very particular application, and looking at these policies through a very particular lens that we want to emphasize does not apply across the city to all sites in general where we're looking at this reduction. Next slide, please. This is just showing the most recent site plan. We're still working with the applicant on a number of issues to work through, including some public realm improvements, a privately owned, publicly accessible open space that will be located on OCH property just to the west. And we are working on some site plan elements and public realm tie-in, especially at the dead end of Chapel Street, where it's currently a cul-de-sac. We're working with our transportation folks to see if there's some opportunities to enhance that Chapel Street turnaround and other designs that would allow for some improvements for landscaping and better pedestrian connections through to Beausoleil Drive. So that's still being worked on through that process. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, we think this project is consistent with the policy direction in our official plan, especially in the new official plan and the direction towards looking at affordable housing projects and prioritizing them. It's a compatible project with minimal impacts on the surrounding area, and it provides affordable housing. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. We do have the applicants to whom we'll give an opportunity to speak. Arnie Saraga and Nadia DeSante will be speaking for the applicants, and they're joined by Baron Meyerhofer with Ottawa Community Housing, Dylan Bennett with OCH, and Stephanie Huss with Diamond Schmidt available to answer questions. So to the applicants team, please feel free to make a 5-minute presentation to the committee whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Arne Saraga. I'm an associate with Diamond Schmidt Architects, and I'll be leading the presentation this morning for the 200-201 Friel Street development. I'm joined by the client team here, Baron Meyerhofer and Dylan Bennett, my colleague Stephanie Huss, and Nadia DeSante, practice lead from WSP Ottawa and lead planner for the development. Next slide, please. Our agenda for this morning is shown to you here. So we will run through all of these items fairly quickly this morning. One note of mention, we met with the community on the evening of June 26th of this year, detailed the project design, and responded to questions and comments from the community, including those that had come in over the past few months as this project has been in development. Next slide, please. To quickly go through the project context, as mentioned, it is located in the Lower Town neighborhood and is highlighted here in yellow and orange. The Lower Town neighborhood is one that is well established, containing many existing community amenities, shopping areas, schools, libraries, parks, among others. And it's also well connected to transit and has a strong pedestrian focused fabric. Next slide, please. Here just, this is our site as it exists right now. It is currently a closed surface parking lot alongside one level of below grade parking that is also shuttered at the moment. This is the view along Beausoleil Drive where you see the blank site. We believe the site in its current state does not add any character or benefit to the neighborhood, and in fact detracts from the pedestrian fabric that exists or is actively in development on neighboring properties. Next slide, please. This is the view along Chapel Street, where there's currently no sidewalk to connect the fabric of the corner there along Chapel to Beausoleil Drive. And we believe that we can improve this through this development. Next slide, please. So here we just see a quick snapshot of a few of the existing neighborhood amenities, including schools, parks, and library facilities. Next slide, please. And a snapshot of the surrounding high-rise residential architecture. Some of these examples being directly adjacent to our site, including 150, 151 Chapel, 160 Chapel, and 200 and 201 Friel Street. Next slide, please. Moving into the details of our proposal, here we see a partial site plan alongside statistics table, which shows our permitted allowances versus the proposed development. As illustrated here, per our review, we are below any prescribed limitations on the subject site when it comes to density, height, and floor plate size. Next slide, please. Zooming into the site plan, we want to highlight a few items. Next slide, please. First is a clarification of heights of the major components of the building, with the podium at 23 meters in height, the tower at 67 meters in height. The mechanical penthouse extends a further 5 meters, with the elevator overrun extending 9 meters over the tower height. Although these elements are exempt from the height restrictions based on zoning bylaw 2008-250. Next slide, please. Next is a highlight of building setbacks and stepbacks of both the podium and the tower. The podium is set back 0.2 meters from Beausoleil Drive, and which we will explain in the next few slides. It's set back 1.5 meters to the podium from Chapel Street and 3 meters from the south property line. The tower steps back further 1.5 meters from the podium along Beausoleil, as well as along Chapel from the podium, and steps back 10.3 meters on the west side and no step back on the south. Next slide, please. As Aaron detailed, we also looked at separation distances between towers. Next slide, please. This highlights in a slightly more graphic way that we are well within or well outside the 23-meter minimum requirements here along the south and the east, and 21 meters to the existing 201 Friel Street. Next slide, please. We're also intending to follow the new Ottawa High Performance Development Standards, with the current tier being decided upon, and we'll also be complying with Ottawa Birth Safe Design Guidelines. Next slide, please. Here's the form of the building. Next slide, please. This massing here is detailed with dimensions and the program definitions. A GFA of approximately 10,100 square meters and a 26-story podium with a 20-story tower and 159 total units. 20% of these units are required to be fully accessible, and this is to a CAN CSA B651 standard, which is above and beyond that required by the Ontario Building Code. Next slide, please. And just to detail this one item, in the podium, we are placing all of our accessible units. And this is a requirement for Ottawa Community Housing's funding model. It's the reason we do have that smaller setback along the north, as we do need to provide these larger units within the building. And it's the only way that we're able to provide the 20% of accessible units in an efficient and cost-effective way, which is obviously important to affordable housing developments to use that funding efficiently.
I've been out of time for a little bit. Can you wrap it up?
Certainly. So I will move over just to the next slide, and I will just go through the tower floor plate. So moving up to.
Sorry,
to
if
the
I may
top.
ask you to wrap it up, please.
Sure.
We are out of time.
I will finish there and we'll respond to any questions or comments that the committee may have.
Thank you very much. So do members of the committee have any questions for the applicant? See none, we'll move on to delegations. Arn, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. So our first presentation is from Kishanth Jayamurthy. Good morning and welcome to Planning and Housing Committee. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Hi, my name is Kishan Jayamurthy. I'm a resident at 200 Frio. I just thought I'd come in and make my opinion mention that I'm in support of the project. This project introduces a lot of modern affordable housing to the Lower Town East area. At the current Lower Town East is a large majority of low-income housing, mostly built in the 60s and 70s. A lot of the infrastructure is a little bit out of date, and seeing some new affordable housing, especially with a lot of the condo buildings being built on Rideau, is really nice to see. Seeing not only that, this building introduces a lot of public amenities, including public indoor public event space, which was lost during when the Jewish Community Center at 151 Chapel was closed. So it's really nice to show. This project is great. It would greatly benefit the community. Sorry. I just thought I'd make my opinion mention. This project would greatly benefit the community. Not only seeing modern affordable housing, but also seeing like the public space it adds, and as well, I'd also like to applaud the people involved in planning this building and using the underutilized parking space at 200 and 201, which helps increase the amount of housing that's available on site by moving parking to already available facilities. And yeah, that's all I like. I'd like to yield the rest of my time, I guess.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments that you've made today. Members of the committee, does anyone have any questions for Kishan? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming out today. Appreciate it. We also have a presentation a delegation from Brian Athey with Morguard. Brian, we're ready to hear your delegation whenever you're ready to provide it.
Good morning. Appreciate your patience while I sort out the technology here. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to committee this morning. My name is Brian Athey. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for Morguard Corporation. Morguard, just a bit of background, is heavily invested in the City of Ottawa and surrounding environment. We have a portfolio of about 10,000 rental apartment units across Canada. We have significant investments in office, retail, and hotel as well in the City of Ottawa. We are not a condo builder. We are a builder and manager of rental apartment buildings. We also fully understand the need for affordable housing and understand Ottawa Community Housing's mandate. We have developed affordable housing in the past and will continue to do so. We are the only abutting property to this proposed development. If approved, it will have a significant impact on our future ability to develop on our site. The current chapel towers were built in 1971. They're now 52 years old. They're a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, total of 370 units. About 100 of those are furnished suites. We provide rental housing, affordable rental housing in the community for students, families, and working professionals. The specific point I'd like to raise about the Ottawa Community Housing Development is that the impact on our future development will be significant. The Ottawa Community Housing site is a very small site. It's very constrained. The actual development area is about, it's not 1 acre, it's about 1/10 of an acre when you look at the plans that were put forward. The south setback, if approved, at 3 meters versus the 7.5 in the bylaw, and the tower separation requirement to redevelop our site at some point in the future, and redevelopment will take place. The northerly 20 meters of our site is effectively sterilized if this goes forward. 3 meters of the 23 is on the Friel site, and 20 meters of the 23 would be on our site. So we would be significantly constrained in the future if this proposal is approved. So I appreciate that this is not a positive response, but it's the reality of being the largest adjacent neighbor, and there would be significant impacts to our property and our ability to redevelop the site. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And certainly it's my intention to ask staff if another councillor doesn't about this question of sterilization of your property. But does any member have questions directly for Brian? Seeing none, Brian, thank you for your presentation today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So turning then, unless there are further delegations, nope. Turning then to questions of staff. Does anyone have any questions of staff? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much for your work on this project. I appreciate the fact that this is going to bring much affordable housing to a community that needs it. I did note in the comments that the local councillor was concerned about security, and I just wanted to know if those issues were addressed as far as the city's concerned.
Certainly, we're still looking at those concerns through the site plan control process, in particular in the development of the privately owned, publicly accessible space. So we have had discussions with Ottawa Community Housing about implementing things like security cameras and lighting that can ensure that safety is presumed across the site, but it's not part of the consideration of the zoning amendment in terms of the scale or massing of the building that's before us today.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate that this is making use of what was previously a parking lot and bringing much needed housing to an area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from members? So I'll ask then about Mr. Athey's presentation. I'll just ask Kelly to put up the separation distances. How do you react to his assertion that the lack of setback will sterilize the Chapel Street property?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Respectively, I think we've looked at a number of redevelopment possibilities for the site, and while we don't like to speculate, there are a number of possibilities that still could be contemplated in that portion, that separation distance, including a low rise or a mid-rise built form, public realm requirements that would be required for any redevelopment. Any access requirements off of Chapel Street could be accommodated in that space, or a number of different possibilities that are potentially outside the high-rise portion of redevelopment, but that would still help with site functionality and other aspects as part of a major redevelopment.
Have you had that conversation directly with Morguard?
We have not. Respectfully, we received their comments through the circulation process, and we provided them with the staff report and so on, but and we're happy to do so moving forward. If they have a redevelopment scenario in the future, as per any application, we're happy to have a pre-application consultation and speak with them about accommodating their functional needs on the site, as well as our desire to see an appropriate separation for high-rise towers.
Okay. Just personally speaking, I'm inclined to support the application or the report recommendations today. I would be interested in hearing more about what some of the constraints might be on Morguard's property before this comes to council, if that can be addressed at even a very high level.
In terms of, well, generally our policies do like to see a 23-meter separation between high-rise towers. And so not to paraphrase what Mr. Athey is saying, but I think his assumption is that it would limit their ability to place a high-rise tower in that particular area of the site. Whereas staff's position is that there's multiple other areas on that large development site that would accommodate a high-rise development proposal up to the maximum gross floor area that's anticipated in the official plan.
And some of those scenarios, though, are kind of what I'm interested in seeing before council, like even at a high level. Where could that Morguard property be developed that would still respect the setback requirements?
Okay.
So I'll touch base with you offline on
Sure.
that one.
Yeah, we can do so.
Because we don't want to necessarily add intensification on one property and just prevent it from occurring at another property. So,
Absolutely.
I'm having difficulties visualizing in my mind today what some of those alternative redevelopment scenarios might look like. So I'll touch base. Are there any other questions from members? I don't see any. Is this item, are the report recommendations carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Aaron, Andrew, thank you very much. All right, if I'm not wrong, Kelly, the next item is 1184, 1188, and 1196 Cummings Avenue. Amazing. Steve is here to make a presentation. Do members want the presentation on this one? So I'll be giving the applicant an opportunity to make a presentation as well. And we have no delegation. Oh, sorry, we have one delegation. Okay. Okay, I'll ask staff to make the presentations. Whenever you're ready. And we'll get that pulled up on screen for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. We're here to consider the rezoning of the properties at 1184, 1188, and 1196 Cummings Road or Cummings Avenue. Next slide, please. The subject property is located on the west side of Cummings Avenue, just north of Ogilvie Road. It is within the Silverville community. The site is approximately 3,500 square meters in size with 75 meters of frontage on Cummings Avenue and a lot depth of around 45 meters deep. The surrounding lands to the north and the west are predominantly residential. There is a two-story townhouse. There's a two-story townhouse condominium project directly to the west and to the north. To the properties on the south and the east are commercial that front onto Ogilvie. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of the street views of the site. As you are looking south on Cummings Ave, it's on the right-hand side of the property. There are 3 existing residential houses on the property. And to the south, if you see looking north on Cummings, you can see the gas station and car wash that's right at the corner. The last site is off of a private road, Wendell Drive, and it shows the back of the site from the condominium. Next slide, please. The official plan designation has the property designated as neighborhood with a involving neighborhood overlay. This is in the inner urban transect, Schedule B2. The plan focuses development in the inner urban transacts to hubs and along corridors. Ogilvie is a corridor main street just south of the site. Section 4.1.4.2 of the plan also allows for reductions in required parking as long as you are within 800 meters of walking distance to a rapid transit station. The site is located within 700 meters of the Searville station as you walk. Next slide, please. There are a couple of couple of plans that also deal with the site. The Inner East Line 1 and 3 station secondary plan has the site shown. It's the very north. It's in blue. It shows that the site is in Area D, which permits 6-story buildings along with a minimum of 180 units per hectare. This is to show that it is a transitional site from the 30-story property across the street. So this becomes a transition between those low-rise condominiums and the higher future development to the east. Next slide, please. This site is also within the Transit-Oriented Development Plan, or the TOD. It also shows this as a transition site between the 30-story buildings and the areas that are existing and not to be redeveloped. So it also shows it as a TD1 zone proposed, and that consists of or allows for up to 6 stories in that area. Okay, next slide, please. Here's the concept plan of the site. It is a 6-story residential building with a kind of an L-shaped formation, with the massing of the building pressed up towards Cummings Avenue and onto Wedneday Drive, leaving some space in the rear of the property for some parking, amenity, and allow for the ramp to go down into the base of the building. The building is proposed to be 6 stories, which is about 18.5 meters in height. There is a permitted mechanical floor on top. They are proposing 37 residence parking spaces. That is a reduction from the 88 that is required under the standard conditions of or provisions of the bylaw. And they are providing the full 19 visitor parking spaces that are required under the bylaw. Next slide. This is an elevation of the site from the road. So it takes up most of the frontage along there. There is an access on the left-hand side where you would go to the parking at the rear. And the next slide. Sorry, this is a very busy slide, and it goes over all the provisions that are normally allowed in the TD1 zone, which we're contemplating on rezoning this to. It meets all the qualifications or all the provisions of the TD zone, save and except for the parking for the residents. They're looking to reduce that parking from a 0.5 per unit down to about a 0.19. And this is supported by the fact that it is within walking distance of the rapid transit station, and it's on the edge of the development of the TOD development area. And this is just some of the planning rationales that we were using to support this application. Proposed development is looking to utilize lands that are not fully utilized at this time. It's a mid-rise building that will contribute to housing diversity in the area. It meets the heights and the minimum densities required in secondary plans. It implements the TOD plan. Underground parking enhances the residential, makes more room for amenity space on the surface, and we're working with them through the site plan to ensure that the public realm is protected and that there are street trees. The site is adequately serviced, and the parking reduction, coupled with the increased bicycle parking, is supported as a sustainable mode of travel. I'll leave it at that, if you have any questions.
No, Steve, thank you very much. I will just quickly ask, the one decision that this committee is being asked to make today is whether or not to reduce the parking ratio. Is that substantially what's in play this morning?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I'm actually deaf.
I just want to clarify that, you know, the 6-story building is allowed, the density is allowed. The key issue with which committee needs to grapple this morning is
the only
the
exception.
parking.
Yeah, the only exception that we are doing is to reduce the parking. There may be some, there were some community comments with regards to the height and massing of the building, but those are all supported by the secondary plan.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to move on to the applicants led by Tim Bede. I'll just make a quick note to the applicants. And I know I've said this a couple of times this term of council. You're probably going to run out of time if you make the same presentation that staff made. So I would suggest focusing on those points that you need to make to the committee. I'm assuming, Tim, you'll be leading this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee.
Thanks.
Yes, I have a presentation, but I agree there'd be a lot of reiteration. So I'm happy to just skip to the last 2 slides. I think would be appropriate and speak to some of, I guess, the last 3 slides. So as you know, this is a site within very close proximity to transit, and therefore is within the TOD plans as well as the secondary plans which support increased intensification and height on the lands. I've included this site just to show that we are currently zoned for the residential third density zone with some exceptions. But as Steve mentioned in his presentation, the application is to rezone the lands to the TD1 zone as it's directed within the secondary plan and transit-oriented development plan. But we can see here that further supporting this application is the existing zoning framework on the lands, which allow heights up to 22 stories in close proximity, bordering the sites around the property. And therefore, the site is, within context for the planned future development, height and intensity of the lands. The next slide, please. There's been some discussion about the reduced parking on the site. And as we can see here, the site is within Area X currently, which would request or require a 0.5 parking rate per residential unit. But we are also in very close proximity to the Area Z, and the Area Z is meant to be a transit supportive area for the parking requirements within the city of Ottawa, which requires 0 parking on site. We're within a few hundred meters of that designation within Schedule 1A. And, in form and function, I think it's important to note that the subject site's contextual location, ability to access transit, and ability to, access the daily amenities and important locations in terms of employment, services, amenities, parks, schools, things of that nature, as well as within proximity 650 meters walking distance to Searville and just a little bit farther to the St. Laurent station, really is supportive and facilitates residents being able to meet their needs using multiple modes of transportation and significantly reduces the need for private vehicle use on the site. I think just to kind of reiterate, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to transition to the TD1 zone is supported and facilitated by the official plan, the TOD plan, and the East Lines 1 and 3 station secondary plan. So it helps to establish that scale that's been anticipated by the city and it's over, and as well as the secondary plan for the minor corridor designation to facilitate that gentle density. It's, I think, sometimes referred to as the missing middle, and is compatible in scale and size with the existing and planned function of the site. I think that Steve covered a lot of the more technical details of the application, and I'm happy to yield my time and answer any questions that you might have moving forward.
Yep, thank you, Tim. I appreciate the presentation. Councillor Kavanagh?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that you're doing missing middle, and there's going to be a lot more of this coming up. I found it odd that for the bicycle parking. It was 184 for 188 units. And is there any chance for increasing it? It just seemed odd to me.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Yes, I think through the site plan control application, which is ongoing, we are working on site layout functionality. And I think obviously for additional bicycle parking spaces can be accommodated, and it's a matter of determining location, accessibility. A number of the bicycle parking spaces are located at the rear and underground parking garage. And I think we're looking for those, immediately accessible near the front door, near the public right of way type spaces, which will be determined as we also work through tree planting, and there's a right of way taking that will be required for the site. So there are some technical issues that we're continuing to work through with staff on the site plan, but a 1-to-1 bicycle parking ratio is an important aspect of the full suite of TDM measures that are considered on the site, and to allow for residents to use their vehicle, use transit, use bike, and walk when they need to. When this for the site once at full development.
Thank you. This is a question that gets asked more and more. Are you going to have car share available as well? Are you going to reach out to a car share to be on your spaces, maybe taking up a visitor parking, I don't know, to make it easier for those who do not have a parking spot?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. It has been a discussion that we've had and looking at the various opportunities available. It's not something that's been determined at this point. As was mentioned in the presentation, the proposal currently provides the required visitor bicycle parking amount, visitor resident parking amount, and so we'd like to see how that could fit and if it's possible to include. I think at the point that we're at now, we'll be looking at that with staff as we move forward, and really focusing on transit accessibility and walking and bicycling as predominant modes of transportation and mobility for the residents of the site.
So at this point, you haven't reached out to anyone on that?
No, at this point we have not.
Okay, all right. All right, I hope you'll consider it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tim, from one Tim to another. I know you've been working hard on this proposal, making many modifications, and just up the road, actually, at 1068, they're completing 300 units on a piece of property that was kind of industrial. It was kind of weird, sandblasty stuff. That strip of road is always going to be upgraded to something in the future as far as housing. It's also 6 stories. Did you base a lot of your principles on that as well, just knowing it's only literally a few properties up?
I think, important considerations in terms of determining height and massing of a building are obviously the overarching policy and regulatory framework, which is quite supportive of the site in terms of 6 stories in the secondary plan, as well as through the official plan, but also importantly, and I kind of referenced to it earlier, but could elaborate, is the existing zoning. So the as of right zoning and existing built form on the site includes permissions for or existing buildings of this similar typology, that 6-story missing middle, with adequate transitions to maybe some of those lower rise communities, generally in the rear of the properties, especially when fronting a street light coming. So yes, it's important obviously to ensure that the building fits now and also with the future planned context of a site, and especially in close proximity to transit, which can kind of experience a lot of development pressure. And so sensitivity is an important consideration early on.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's my questions.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Tierney. Tim, if committee were to recommend refusal of this application, that we didn't consider that reducing the number of parking spots was appropriate, what are some of the design changes you could make to try to accommodate that? What would be the outcomes?
I think that there's a design consideration as well as a feasibility consideration in terms of units and ensuring that there's that high density intensification and close proximity to the city's LRT, as well as just a complete community with a number of amenities and services. But I suppose if necessary, considerations for a different unit layout, unit count could reduce that. It's difficult to consider providing more parking in an area like this, which I think is, based on overarching direction from the city and just the way that cities in general are growing. To provide more parking on a site like this is not exactly within good planning principles, but reallocating units, talking about different sizes of units would of course reduce the need for certain amounts of parking. But I think that this is a site that is well situated to accommodate the proposed parking, and just across the street, for example, as I mentioned in the presentation, zero parking is required, and practically and functionally the site will operate in the same way and benefit from some of the same attributes and merits of the community at large, rather than one side of the street versus the other.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I mean, logically speaking, you could, on the same footprint, if you wanted to adhere to the 6 stories, you could just significantly reduce the number of units in here. But you're sacrificing units, which we desperately need during a housing crisis, for parking virtually across the street from an area in which parking is not even required by zoning. So I think that would be a pretty drastic outcome. Do any other members have questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate the presentation. And Richard Haniff is here. Mr. Haniff, come on up to the delegation chair, and you'll have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I appreciate all the bylaws that exist that allows this development, but I'm going to read something hopefully within 5 minutes. So here I go. And I apologize if the things I'm saying is inappropriate according to procedures. The bylaws zoning amendment and the site plan control should not be approved for the site to rezone from a R3 to a TD1 for the following reasons. The report to the planning committee regarding the application does not completely address or raise the following matters that support reasons possibly reasons not to approve such a zoning bylaw amendment. The following provide some reasons. The site size and proximity to the abutting units that are 1 to 2 stories make the site inappropriate because of the size, height, and position relative to the surrounding context. Does not allow for appropriate transition and harmonious integration for a 6-story building. Even though the TD zoning fits onto the lot according to TD specifications, the building is a stark difference in height and density, the abutting surrounding context, and does not have any proper, it may be missing community planning. The site plan control, and I apologize if this is out of not appropriate. The site plan control should not be approved until all matters requiring review, such as the review by the Urban Design Review Panel related to the integration to the surrounding context and the potential impact of blasting to buildings in such close proximity are explicitly assured and measured for impact. Allowing the site to be approved for rezoning to TD and the site plan control may lead to a scenario where a condition cannot be met and the resulting zoning would be inappropriate for the site. Therefore, it is recommended that the site plan control not be approved and not approved concurrently. My next point, even though the secondary plan for the area designates the proposal site as planned for TD1, when considering this in the context of the area and reading the specific planning considerations in the TOD planning documents, which specifies that proposed development should be reviewed and planned according to the specifics of the proposal and surrounding context, it can be seen that a rezoning of the proposal site to TD1 may be inappropriate as a majority of surrounding context is such a different density and height and setbacks and does not allow enough space for a great green space, adequate entry and exits for vehicles, and harmonious transitions with the surrounding context. A subpoint, it should be also noted that when looking at the inner east secondary plan lines 1 and 3, the 600 meter radius mostly encompasses areas south of Ogilvy. The area south of Ogilvy is suitable for TD zoning as there is no low density stable housing requiring harmonious transitions. TD zoning north of Ogilvy, where the site is possibly not the best fit and should be amended on the secondary plan after some consideration. The proposed design, my next point, then the proposed design only allows for one driveway for the site, which is inadequate to allow proper traffic to service the density of 188 units. Subpoint, this causes congested access to the site for the high likelihood of pickups, drop-offs for those without cars or residents using friends, ride fare services for commuting, para transportation to and from appointments for our aging community, and delivery trucks of online purchases. That's now common. This generally raises the risk on the street, raises the risk of on-street stopping and parking, or the same on other private property, or for those who turn onto the site is forced to do three-point turns to exit the property to block a lane to do their drop-offs. Another subpoint, the one access point to the proposed site is also very close proximity to two other very busy driveways and close proximity to a very busy intersection at Cummings and Ogilvy. Adding the proposed driveway in such a close proximity to those elements raises the existing daily chaos at that point to a new level. Another subpoint, it should be noted that cities, oh, no, never mind about that. I also submitted documents for this, so it's available for your reading. There are other options that allow a redevelopment of the proposed site that would meet all relevant policies and provide adequate entry, exit, harmonious transitions, fit, and density for the size of the lot, such as rezoning to R5 density, which matches the surrounding context and provides densities that support transit use. Building multiple low-rise,
Richard, we've been out of time for a bit now, so I'll just need to ask you to wrap up with a sentence.
And lastly, a possibility is to allow multiple low rises, such as 4 stories with appropriate setbacks and or stacked townhouses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Do any members have any questions for Richard? I'll pose a quick one. I just want to make sure, because I'm going to ask staff this. Your assertion is that while the TD1 zoning may be contemplated by the secondary plan, there is still a requirement that it be appropriately transitioned to the abutting low-rise neighborhoods. You don't feel it is, and thus this committee should reject the recommendation from staff. Is that roughly accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? None? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Are there any questions from members for staff? I don't see any hands up. To staff, here's a surprise. I have a question. The delegation has asserted that there is an inappropriate transition as required by the secondary plan, and thus the rezoning should be rejected. How do you respond to that?
I think that actually a secondary plan sees this as a transitional space rather than the transition from the site. The TOD or the TD1 zone actually has provisions for setbacks and step downs to the properties at the rear, so that the 6 stories in Massing is up close to Cummings, but as you're going down the wing on the north side of the property, it steps down to I believe it's 15 meters so down to the 4-story level, which is more conducive to what is going on behind it with the 2-story townhomes in behind.
Okay,
so there are transitions in the zoning bylaw.
Perfect. I know I'm satisfied with that explanation, having taken a look at it. Are there any other questions for members? Thank you very much for that answer. See none, is this item carried? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it. Moving on. Does anyone want to take like a 5-minute break? We got a few items left. Or yeah, we've only got the information, the IPD. Carry through. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, so the final substantive item on the agenda is the status update on the new zoning bylaw. Thank you very much, committee, for your amenability to lifting that for discussion. I have asked staff to prepare a presentation for this today. And then once that presentation is done, I'm going to ask Councillor Kitts to present a motion that's been worked on.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to introduce to my right, I have Robert Sandercott. Robert is the planner on my team that's doing the work for the neighborhood zones in the new zoning bylaw. And Robert is the planner who has also been preparing the amendments relating to Bill 23. So this is an information previously distributed to update the committee on the status of the work on the new zoning bylaw. So thanks for the opportunity to provide this status update. I'm going to be providing an update on, could I have the next slide, please? Implications of Bill 23 for the new zoning bylaw, protected major transit station areas, a form and function discussion paper, the project funding and staffing implications, and the project engagement and next steps. Next slide, please. So we're all aware we're experiencing unprecedented housing affordability challenges in Ottawa, and this applies really across Canada. In response to this, the province passed Bill 23, which is well-intended legislation aimed at increasing housing supply and choice. Bill 23 provides a total of 3 units on serviced residential lots across the city. So 1 principal dwelling unit and 2 additional dwelling units are permitted in a detached dwelling, and in each unit of a semi-detached dwelling and a townhouse dwelling. These new permissions support the objectives of the city's municipal housing pledge, the Housing Accelerator Fund, the new official plan, and the directions that we will be taking the new zoning bylaw to implement the official plan. In response to Bill 23, staff circulated a comprehensive package of zoning amendments in March of this year to better align the provisions of the zoning bylaw with the intent of Bill 23 and the official plan. So there are provisions currently in the zoning bylaw that just are broken now as a result of Bill 23. And specifically, I can highlight the changes that are needed to the provisions for our secondary dwelling unit provisions, which only contemplate 1 additional unit and limit the size of that unit to 40% of the principal dwelling as a whole, and limitations on the locations of doors and other sorts of provisions that just no longer work in the context of Bill 23. So a comprehensive package of zoning amendments was distributed to the public, and the following consultations with community representatives and the development industry, the package of amendments was scaled back. So the original package was very comprehensive, and we went for the full range of amendments that could be undertaken in response to Bill 23 to implement the intent of the official plan better and more effectively, rather than just making the bare bones changes to the secondary dwelling unit provisions and the coach house provisions. So that we included there was a broad range of amendments, and they were far reaching. We were proposing to extend the application of the in all of the infill initiatives broadly across the city. And the point of that was really to address the, minimum standards in terms of design and functionality for what are now higher permissions for development across the city. So we consulted with the development industry and community associations and wound up scoping back that comprehensive package to focus on 3 initiatives. So the first bucket are the modifications to the provisions for secondary dwelling units and coach houses, which everyone agreed upon. They agreed that these are what are needed to eliminate unnecessary barriers in the bylaw. The second bucket was harmonization of certain R3, R4, and R5 subzone provisions for detached duplex and triplex dwellings, where the development standards are different for those dwelling types. So this was in recognition of the fact that each of these dwelling types permit a total of 3 units. So it no longer makes sense to have a higher lot width and lot width area requirement for 3 units in a triplex than for 3 units in a detached dwelling. And then the final amendment that we are proposing in that scoped package of amendments was a minimum landscaped area requirement for rear yards. So, and this was specifically to allow us to achieve room for a tree. And this is in keeping with directions in the official plan regarding healthy neighborhoods and the urban heat island effect, and basically just the quality of the environment of neighborhoods, and try and support livable neighborhoods in the future. And the amendment is seen as a response to a form of development that we're currently seeing across the city that's becoming more common, specifically associated, for example, with long semis, where the rear yard of the property is completely paved and used for parking. And we heard in our consultations with the community associations that they were finding this to be a harsh form of development, that it didn't allow for trees, and that they would prefer that something was done about it. On the other hand, the development industry found that any new requirement for a rear landscaping was going to upset their development models, and that they preferred to see changes in that regard come through in the new zoning bylaw. So it was determined that further consultations were needed. I should have mentioned also that community associations were not really generally in favor of the harmonization. So some community association representatives, continued to favor, they liked the higher standards for certain, for triplex buildings, for example, and they wanted those to remain. So since we weren't really able to get very far in our consultations, despite having scoped back the amendments considerably, we are proposing further consultations. We just think that further consultations are needed and intend to pursue those this summer. I should mention that Bill 23 also modified requirements for growth-related charges, and that we need to better understand those implications. So additional dwelling units are not subject to development charges and cash in lieu of parkland payments. And we are working with staff and finance and staff working with the development charges bylaw just to better understand what sort of reductions we're going to see in revenues as a result of that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the amendments that are needed to bring the zoning, better align the zoning bylaw with Bill 23 and reduce impediments to the development of these 3 units, which we all understand that we need to see. Staff are proposing to undertake further consultations and to bring an amendment in the fall, which would at bare minimum modify those provisions for secondary dwelling units and coach houses to permit additional dwelling units, eliminate the 40% maximum size restriction for additional dwelling units, and eliminate restrictions on where doors may be located. There's also a technical issue right now that requires, if you want to build 3 dwelling units in a semi-detached or a townhouse dwelling, before you can get your building permit issued, you have to do a consent application. And so we are proposing to include a provision that would eliminate that requirement, that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily have to do a consent application because that does add costs to a development proposal where they intend to rent the units, and there is no need to do consents to divide the ownership. Staff also want to continue to monitor the form of development that we're seeing with those building permits that are being issued under Bill 23 for 3 units in a single, a semi, or a detached, or rather a townhouse dwelling, just to see the type of development that we're seeing. Are we seeing rear yards being paved in many cases? And evaluate what types of provisions are going to be needed and build that into the consultations as we're going. Next slide, please. So moving on to the next topic that I wanted to cover in this update. The new official plan designated 25 new protected major transit station areas. And those designations were approved as part of the new official plan by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing on November 4th, 2022. And then later in that month, later in November, on November 28th, Bill 23 made changes to the Planning Act to require municipalities to implement zoning to achieve minimum densities in PMTSAs within 1 year of the PMTSA policies coming into effect. Implementing zoning provisions to achieve those minimum densities in the official plans is a priority identified in the Municipal Housing Pledge and the Housing Accelerator Fund submission. Staff developed a method for evaluating the density potential offered by current zoning that applies in PMTSAs, or that zoning can't deliver the densities specified in Table 3 of the official plan. Zoning changes will be proposed to ensure the minimum densities can be achieved. And so what I want to highlight here is that protected major transit station area report, which will be coming to committee before November 4th of this year, is not going to implement the full intent of the policies for hubs. So we're not going to be applying permissions for 40 stories in protected major transit station areas. That is not what the Planning Act is telling us what we need to do within 1 year of the PMTSAs being designated. What the Planning Act tells us is that we have to provide density that meets those minimum densities in the official plan, which is in the range of around 200 to 250 units per hectare, up to 500 units per hectare in the downtown area. The full implementation of the hubs policies, including upzonings in the hubs, to broadly implement the policies for the hub designation in the official plan, will come as part of the new zoning bylaw. And of course, the new zoning bylaw, the first draft, will be delivered in March of 2024. The city has hired consultants to complete the analysis of the PMTS areas in terms of the ability of the current zoning to achieve those densities in the official plan. Some of the consultant costs will be submitted for reimbursement to the province through the Streamlined Development Approval Fund. This work is also eligible for funding under the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund, should council decide that that's an appropriate use of the funds. Next slide, please. So, staff plan to bring a neighborhood form and function discussion paper as a public consultation vehicle in the summertime. So later in July or early August. The paper will focus on minimum zoning standards to achieve good design outcomes with regard to built form and functional requirements of low-rise infill in the neighborhood designation, including consideration of building setbacks, minimum soft landscaping, amenity area requirements, bicycle parking, waste management, access to the site, and building articulation. Consultations and public engagement on the discussion paper will take place from the time it's released in late July or early August through the remainder of 2023 to gather views on regulating development in the neighborhood designation. And this would be speaking specifically to the new neighborhood zones that will replace our R1 through R5 zones. Feedback received will be considered in developing the first draft of the new zoning bylaw, with a summary report published prior to the release of the first draft in March. Next slide, please. So, staffing and project funding implications. In terms of staffing for the new zoning bylaw project, the zoning unit has been at half of the projected complement of staff needed to complete the bylaw for the duration of the bylaw for the duration of the work on the bylaw to date. This is a tight labor market for planners, and hiring both internal and external competitions have not been successful in hiring or attracting new staff for the team. Additional work from Bill 23, the Housing Accelerator Fund, the legislative review for Bill 109, regular maintenance to the zoning bylaw have also strained staff capacity for work on the new zoning bylaw. For example, amendments needed for renewable energy generation facilities, both at this planning committee and later in the year, are required. Office to residential conversions, our staff have been involved in the zoning amendments needed for that report, which is upcoming. Affordable housing related amendments in relation to city-owned properties that will need to be rezoned to maximize their benefit and use for affordable housing in the future. Coming forward separately from the new zoning bylaw. My team has also been working on inclusionary zoning. The Housing Accelerator Fund application, that was a member of the zoning unit who worked on that application, who is the lead for that application. The work that's undertaken, the amendments required under the Planning Act for protected major transit station areas, which must occur before November 4th. The regular omnibus zoning amendments that we do undertake to correct errors. The Bill 23 amendments that Robert has been working on, and work that staff have been contributing to for stormwater management, for the infrastructure master plan, and then reports such as for short-term rentals and updates to the floodplain, mapping in the zoning bylaw. All of these are reports that my team is responsible for in addition to the new zoning bylaw. So what I'd like to say is that despite these challenges, significant efforts have been made to address the legislative impacts and maintain the current bylaw while also staying on track with the new zoning bylaw. To ensure the project stays on schedule, consultants have been hired to assist with the first draft of the bylaw, including for provisions for hubs, corridors, protected major transit station areas, urban industrial zones, rural industrial zones, the mineral aggregate overlay, which will apply in the rural area and is needed in response to policy changes in the new official plan, renewable energy generation facilities, and the neighborhood zones. So we have hired consultants to work with us on all of these packages for the new zoning bylaw. And given that we've hired consultants to help us with the neighborhood zones, I would hope that we can proceed at an accelerated pace to expedite the development of the neighborhood zone provisions with the consultant support, and we'll see how that goes this year. In terms of funding, the budget for the new zoning bylaw is funded from development charges. So 90% of our budget comes from DCs. Changes to the Development Charges Act approved through Bill 23 no longer make it possible to collect development charges to support studies. And so what that means is the funding, that 90% funding for the new zoning bylaw will end with the expiration of the development charges bylaw in April of 2024. So staff are working with finance department to find solutions for this funding challenge, and options to address the funding issue will be reported back to council in the fall. Next slide, please. So in terms of consultations and next steps, we have released 7 discussion papers earlier this year, and we've been receiving comments on those. So public feedbacks on the surveys, and the surveys will be open until the end of July when we release the discussion paper for neighborhood form and function. Once that's released, we'll be receiving comments on that discussion paper until the end of 2023. And as we heard, a report will be published in early September, summarizing initial responses to the discussion papers and feedback on the form and function paper. We plan to have 4 open houses in September, some of which will be in person and some of them will be virtual, to share information about the new official plan and gather input on implementation of the new zoning bylaw and on the discussion papers that have been released. And we're also planning pop-up events at community gatherings and high foot traffic areas, similar to the types of events that were undertaken for the new official plan. And the point of that is to get a diverse comments from a wide range of groups, which is really needed to ensure that we do effective public consultation. We want to hear from all people. and get a variety of viewpoints. A final, as we heard it, report will be published in Q1 of 2024, summarizing feedback from the consultation activities and to inform then, of course, how it's informed the first draft of the zoning bylaw. So on that concludes the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. A good comprehensive overview and a good update in a timely way before we break for summer. So my understanding is that the Bill 23 amendments, Bill 23 related amendments, it would be helpful for you to have some direction from council with respect to bringing that forward. And I believe Councillor Kitts has a motion to that effect.
Do. I can read it out. Whereas the intent of the IPD is to update members of the Planning and Housing Committee on the status of the new zoning bylaw review. And whereas on November 28th, 2022, the province of Ontario enacted Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act, which encourages gentle densification through increasing the minimum number of additional dwelling units. And whereas the current zoning bylaw 2005-280 does not contemplate 2 additional dwelling units as permitted under Bill 23. And as a result, there are amendments needed to the current zoning bylaw to align it with Bill 23 and to ensure orderly development in accordance with the official plan. And whereas a package of amendments was circulated in March 2023 that included removing zoning provisions for secondary dwelling units and coach houses that are not aligned with Bill 23, harmonization of certain subzone provisions for detached duplex and triplex dwellings, and a minimum rear yard landscaping requirement to support the livability of neighborhoods, tree retention, tree planting in rear yards, and the long-term renewal of the urban forest tree canopy. Therefore, be it resolved that with respect to the IPD, council approve the following. Direct staff to return to council no later than September 2023, with options to amend the zoning bylaw in response to Bill 23. A, direct staff to consult with industry and members of the community prior to returning to committee. And 2, direct that staff return to council in Q4 2023 with proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw pursuant to recommendation 1.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We have questions for members. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, staff. Doesn't sound like you're going to have a fun summer. Wow, there's so much to do in so little time. I'm curious, are you keeping in touch with other municipalities across Ontario, especially equivalent city sizes? And what are you hearing from them? And can we learn and work together?
Yes, staff have been in touch with planners in the City of Toronto to review their multiplex provisions and discuss the challenges and so on that they faced in implementing those provisions. And we will be trying to keep up. We do try to keep up to date with other municipalities and what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I just assume that it's like reinventing the wheel. If we all have the same issues that we're working with, that we can learn from each other. So I appreciate that. And I realize it's tough to get new planners. I'm also wondering about other occupations when you're talking about we need more planners. Do we not need more engineers, et cetera, for like stormwater, except and the other issues? Is that also an issue?
Yes, I believe it is. I think Don can speak to that, but there are plans to hire.
Yes, certainly through the recent Bill 109 staffing complement that was approved through council, there were a number of planners added, but also civil engineering staff, legal staff, everyone that supports the planning process. So it's not just planners; it's a whole suite of folks that we're adding through that piece.
And I hope that includes foresters.
It did, and it does. Yes.
Yes. I appreciate the fact that we're really sticking to our commitment in the official plan of 40% tree canopy. It seems like there's an emphasis on the rear yard, but when I look at the diagrams, et cetera, it's the front yard is important too, if it's possible. Providing shade to streets, et cetera. Is that the case?
So typically in the zoning bylaw, there is a general prohibition on front yard parking. So we don't, I mean, there are driveways permitted in most zones, but there are limitations on the width of driveways and front yards. And so, and that's really to leave space for trees and landscaping. There are currently no requirements for rear yard landscaping in most zones. The Westboro provisions do have requirements for rear yard landscaping. So that's the issue. There's a gap right now. There's no minimum landscaping requirement in most zones for rear yards.
Because we did have the 30% rule for the front, correct? Is that, and so you're trying to extend it? Is that?
We are trying to extend, or we were trying to implement a minimum requirement to get at least one tree.
Yes, please. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Councillor Johnson?
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on your comment, Carol, and thank you very much for the presentation when you said that you were working to staff up some of these roles, but that the staffing effort was not successful. And, you know, in the context of us, you know, just having approved, as you say, so many new FTEs, I want to know, is there something that the committee and council should understand that is creating, why were we not successful? And is there something we need to understand from an employer of choice perspective, or a livable city perspective, or competitiveness perspective, that we might be able to offer support with, because to grow our team will be essential for success here.
So I'm going to respond in the context of the new zoning bylaw, and then I can maybe leave it to Dawn or Royce to comment citywide. From my perspective, I don't think there are citywide or city corporation issues that limit the attractiveness of this city as an employer for planners. I think in the case of the new zoning bylaw, the issue is that the positions are temporary for 2 years. And if we're trying to attract a limited pool of registered professional planners in Ontario to Ottawa, and they have to move, a temporary position is less attractive. So I think that may be an issue. And I think in terms of for my project, and then there is just, from my understanding, a shortage of planners right now in Ontario for us to draw from. And there are other municipalities who are also trying to hire, you know, in response to Bill 109. I know that the City of Toronto is trying to hire 150 new staff. I'm assuming a combination of planners and engineers. And so we are competing with all other municipalities who have staffing needs. So those are the comments I can give to your question. And then if Dawn or Royce would like to offer their insights, then please do.
Thank you, Chair. I think Carol summarized it well. I don't see it as the city not being an attractive place to live in. I think that's one of the things we have going for us. But it's just a reality in terms of the pressures across Ontario that the recent legislative changes have driven, that there's not enough staff around, and we're seeing that in other provinces in Canada. It's not exclusive to Ontario. So shortage of planners, highly competitive market. We are looking at through the Bill 109 piece, using different staff to. We had a good discussion on Bill 109 in terms of using planning technicians and support staff to help with the front end of the process, more of a team-based approach. So we're looking at creative ways of filling those staffing gaps, but the reality is it's a very tight market.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I was also going to offer, a suggestion when you are considering those in-person open houses on the discussion papers, that you might consider hosting them in some of the wards who have traditionally experienced R1 zoning, because I think that the changes. I was saying to Chair Leeper on the phone last night, I said, we mentioned, R1 zoning changing yesterday at the FinCourt meeting. We're talking about it again here today, and I haven't had much email about it. So I kind of asked him, I said, so is everyone cool with R1 zoning disappearing? And Chair Leeper said, no, I think that maybe people just aren't aware of what the implications of that are. So I would welcome an in-person open house in College Ward, most certainly, so that those residents who, you know, have had those zoning protections, that's not the right word, those zoning boundaries will now understand what changes and what opportunities might come through more gentle intensification, welcoming more local business, more walkability, more road safety, more infrastructure, ideally. So I would just offer that as a hope. Thank you.
Thank you. We've noted that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Are there any other questions for staff? I'll just pose one of my own just with respect to clarification is in order to implement the Spirit and Letter Bill 23, there are, it sounds like, 3 sort of major pots of changes that would need to be made. The first of them is to eliminate a prohibition against accessory units being more than 40% of the principal dwelling unit. And it sounds like all parties are agreed to that. The second and probably more contentious, which I guess we'll need to deal with in the fall, is whether or not we're protecting space in the rear yards for green space. If we just harmonize everything to the single detached housing performance standards, there's no guarantee that we're going to get any green space in the rear yard. It sounds like builders are keen to move ahead without protecting rear yards. Communities, on the other hand, are keen to protect those rear yards with respect to green space. So that's another pot. And then the final pot is with respect to the performance standards. What is the size lot on which a structure can be built, the minimum size lot? What are the minimum setbacks from the property line that determine what can be built on that lot? And it sounds like we again have 2 different perspectives. The builders are keen to harmonize the performance standards for singles, for semis, for triplexes, down to the most permissive performance standards, where some communities are keen on harmonizing around the most restrictive performance standards. So that sounds like something that we'll need to sort out politically as a council. So if the motion that's being brought by Councillor Kitts passes, you're going to come to us in September, hopefully sooner in September rather than later, with a list of options for sorting through those, the directions in which you'd like to go, a consultation plan, and we can have that battle as a body of politicians before the end of the year and determine how we're going to deal with Bill 23. Is that roughly accurate?
Yes, that's a very good summary.
Okay. So I'll just fire my shot across the bow today, which is I'm not willing to do any kinds of changes beyond, I'm willing to wait until we do the full comprehensive zoning bylaw review, unless we have those protections for the rear yard. I don't mind doing things that allow for greater intensification, harmonizing around more permissive performance standards, removing the 40%. But we have to protect those rear yards. In R4, in Westboro infill, we've set that tone, and so I'm looking forward to having the debate. But I do want to warn that it's got to be a package. We can allow more units, but there needs to be some reasonable compromise with respect to protecting green space in the rear yard. Rant over. Any other questions for staff? Thank you for the update. Is the Kitts motion carried? And do we receive the IPD? Received. Excellent. Thank you very much, Carol. Thank you very much, Robert. Are there any notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? Seeing none. Are there any inquiries? We have no other business. We are adjourned until our next meeting on Wednesday, August the 16th, 2023. Thank you very much, colleagues.